Chapter 34. Secret Preparations. No matter how much I tried to keep this work secret, there were always people who managed to uncover something. Some believed what they heard, some did not. I was very worried that someone would inform the provincial about what we were up to when he next came to town. That would have been the death of the whole project, but the Lord circumvented this danger in an unexpected way. It turns out that a grieving widow who lived in Toledo, more than 60 miles from Avila, had called for me. Doña Luisa de Celda was of high nobility. The death of her husband nearly a year earlier had plunged her into a state of inconsolable sorrow for which she could not seem to recover. Her grief had reached such an extreme degree that her loved ones feared for her life. Somehow, Doña Luisa had heard of this miserable little sinner and had taken it into her head that I would be able to help her cope with her loss. The Lord had arranged things so that she heard only good reports of me. As it turns out, many blessings flowed from that favorable beginning. Doña Luisa was well acquainted with the provincial. She knew that I lived in a convent where the nuns were allowed to come and go. Her urge to see me was so powerful that she found it irresistible. And since she was a person of the aristocracy, she knew she could arrange to bring me to Toledo. So she wrote to the provincial, who was far away, to initiate the process. On Christmas Eve, I received an order from him. "Go immediately," he wrote, "and take a companion with you." Because I was under a vow of obedience, I had no choice but to do as I was told. The only thing that bothered me was that this woman was under the illusion that there was something good about me. Knowing the truth about myself, I could not bear this thought. I prayed earnestly to God about it, and my prayer triggered a deep rapture that lasted throughout matins. "Go," the Lord said to me. "Pay no attention to all the opinions on the matter. Very few people have wise counsel to offer." He told me that even though this journey would not be without trials, God would be well served by it. He said that it was appropriate for me not to be home when the contract for the new monastery arrived. The spirit of evil was preparing a cunning plot for the provincial's homecoming. "Do not fear," the Lord said to me. "I will help you with this." These words very much strengthened and comforted me. I told the Jesuit director about it. "Then do not hesitate to go," he said. Other people were insisting that I not go to Toledo. They advised me to ignore the provincial's letter. They warned that this whole trip was a ploy of the devil and that something terrible was going to happen if I left. They urged me to write back to the provincial and inform him that I wasn't going. But it was Father Ibanez I listened to. Strengthened by what I heard in prayer, I went without fear. I continued to feel embarrassed about why they had called me to Toledo, however, since I knew that they were mistaken about what I had to offer. All I could do was beg the Lord to be with me. It made me feel better to learn that there was a Jesuit house founded by Father Francisco de Borja there, and that I could rely on the priests to guide me away from home. It was the Lord's will for Doña Luisa to improve dramatically within a short time of my arrival. For some reason, my presence consoled her. She seemed to be more at peace every day. Her grief had been such a heavy burden that this improvement was a great relief to her. I'm sure it helped that there were a lot of pious people praying for my success in this matter. Doña Luisa was a deeply spiritual person who was in awe of God. Her goodness and her love of Christ seemed to compensate for my shortcomings. She developed a great affection for me. When I saw how much integrity the woman had, I became very fond of her in return. But everything else was a cross for me to bear. The comforts I was given were nothing but a torment, and the way they all fussed over me made me nervous. My soul had such misgivings about all the luxury and kindness that I grew hyper-vigilant. But I did not need to be so watchful, since it turned out that the Lord Himself was watching over me. While I was in that house, God granted me the most sublime blessings in prayer. They released me of any attachments to material things and gave me contempt for the opulence I saw all around me. The greater the favors, the more I despised these things. Although I knew it was an honor to serve such great ladies, I never treated them as anything other than equals. That's how free God made me feel. I had an important insight there, and I shared it with Doña Luisa. I realized we should not envy the nobility, because noble women are human and therefore just as much subject to passions and weaknesses as the rest of us, only they are expected not to succumb. The higher their status, the greater their trials. I observed how careful these women had to be to maintain their composure under all circumstances. It was as if their station did not allow them to live. I saw that the ladies were forced to eat in accordance with prescribed timetables and not in harmony with their physical constitution, and the foods they ate had more to do with their rank than with their actual appetite. Why would I ever want to be a lady of nobility? God deliver me from phony composure. The truth is, I have met few women as humble and as deeply simple as Doña Luisa, who happens to be one of the most noble in the kingdom. Whenever I saw how she was forced to go against her own inclinations to fulfill the duties of her state, I felt deep compassion for her. Her servants were no help. She had some good ones, but most of them could not be trusted. God forbid you spoke to one more than another. Everyone else started to hate the one you favored. Aristocracy is nothing but subjugation. It is a lie to call these people master when they are slaves to 1,000 things. It was the Lord's will for the people who lived in that house to be of greater service to God when I was around. Of course, the love the lady bore me caused some envy and brought me some trials. There were people who seemed to think I was vying for some personal advantage. I suppose the Lord challenged me in this way, as well as in other ways, to keep me from becoming enchanted by all the luxury I experienced there. To my soul's great profit, He chose to extricate me from all this. While I was in Toledo, a very noble person showed up in that city. He was a priest, and we had been in touch many times over the years. I was attending Mass at a monastery of his order near the house where I was staying when I caught sight of him. I had this overwhelming urge to speak to him. I wanted to know the condition of his soul, since I longed for this man to be a great servant of God. So I got up to talk to him. But since I was in a deep state of recollection and prayer, this impulse suddenly struck me as a waste of time, so I sat down again. Who was I to meddle in his interior life? I think I went through these motions 3 times. Rising, returning to my pew, standing again, sitting back down. Finally, the good angel won out over the bad. I went to him and asked him to meet me in the confessional. It had been many years since we had seen each other, and we began to ask each other questions about our lives. I mentioned that there had been innumerable trials that had plagued my soul. "Tell me about them," he urged me. "No one is supposed to know about these things," I said. "I probably shouldn't have brought it up in the first place." "Don't worry," he said. "Pedro Ibáñez, the Dominican father you mentioned, is a good friend of mine. I will get the story from him." But the truth is, this priest could not resist the temptation to keep pressing me for details, and I could not resist sharing them. I didn't feel any of the characteristic shame and terror I usually experienced when I spoke of these things. Rather than suffering distress, I felt unburdened. I discussed these matters within the privacy of the confessional. I had always believed that this priest had a very good mind, but now he seemed wiser than ever. I recognized the special talents and gifts he had and saw the good he could do if he gave himself entirely to God. I have had this experience many times over the years. Whenever I like someone very much, I am filled with nearly unbearable longings. I want to see this person utterly surrender to God. While I want everyone to serve God, my yearning is especially acute when it comes to the people who please me most. Thus, I fervently beseech the Lord on their behalf. This is what happened to me when I met with the priest I am speaking about. He asked me to pray wholeheartedly to God on his behalf. But he didn't need to ask. I was already so filled with prayers for him that I could not have done otherwise. I went to my usual place for solitary contemplation and became instantly and profoundly recollected. I began to talk to the Lord in that silly way of mine. I don't know what I'm saying when this happens. It's love that's talking. My soul becomes so transported that I can no longer tell any difference between her and God. Love knows that it already possesses the beloved. It forgets all about the individual soul and thinks she is one with him. Free of all distinctions, she speaks pure nonsense. I remember that day when I tearfully begged God to take the soul of that priest into his committed service. I already considered him a good man, but this wasn't enough for me. I wanted him to be even better. Lord, you must not refuse me this favor, I said to His Majesty. I have a feeling it is going to be very important to have this good man as our friend. Oh, the great goodness and loving kindness of God. You do not look at our words, but at the desires and the will that animates them. How do you put up with someone like me who speaks so boldly to your Majesty? May you be blessed forever and ever. I recall that at one point during that night of fervent prayer, a great sadness washed over me. I started wondering if I had alienated myself from God. How could I tell if I was in a state of grace or not? It wasn't that I wanted to know, it's just that I wanted to die. Only in death would I find myself in a life where I wouldn't wonder whether or not I was dead, since there was no death more terrifying to me than not knowing if I had forsaken my beloved. The pain of wondering overwhelmed me. I was overflowing with tears, dissolving in tears. Please, God, I beseeched him, do not let me be separate from your grace. Then it struck me that the sure sign that I was in grace was the boundless love for him that filled and spilled from my soul. This consoled me immeasurably. Look at all the divine favors and holy feelings he had given me in the past few years. Could such blessings coexist in harmony with a soul in mortal sin? Of course not. I rested in the confidence that His Majesty would do what I asked him to do for the priest. Then the Lord gave me some words to tell the man. I hate it when God does this. I don't know how to convey these things. It embarrasses me to deliver messages from the Lord to a third party, especially in this case. I didn't know how this priest would take it. Maybe he would make fun of me. I became very distressed about it, but God was so persuasive that I finally agreed to tell the man what God said. To mitigate my shame, I wrote it down and gave it to him in a letter. Well, the words definitely seemed to come from God, because they had an amazing effect on this man. He resolved to dedicate himself wholeheartedly to the practice of prayer, even though it took him a while to follow through on this intention. The Lord used me as a conduit to transmit some truths to this man, because he wanted his soul for his own. Without my even knowing it, these things were so relevant that it astonished him. The synchronicity convinced him that the messages indeed came from God. Wretch though I may be, I earnestly implored God to transform this man completely in himself and make him reject the shallow gratification and petty things of this world. It worked. May God be praised forever." The priest turned so completely toward God that every time he opens his mouth to speak to me now, I am in awe. If I had not witnessed this myself, I would have had trouble believing that God would have granted any soul so many and such powerful favors in such a short time. He is so full of God that he seems to be empty of any worldly attachment whatsoever. May His Majesty protect him. This man seems to be so well grounded in self-knowledge that if he continues to advance at this rate, he will become one of God's most cherished servants and lead a multitude of souls to the way of perfection. This man has gained a great deal of spiritual experience in a very short time. These are gifts God gives when and how He wills. They do not depend on time, and they are not compensation for services rendered. It's not that time and services are unimportant. It's just that sometimes the Lord gives the grace of contemplation to one person within a year of starting out on the path and does not give it to another person who might have been practicing prayer for 20 years. His Majesty knows the reason why. Here's where we make our big mistake. We think that years of study should yield an understanding that can only come through direct experience. Many guides are mistaken in believing that they can discern spirits without having spiritual experience themselves. I'm not saying that someone who has not had spiritual experience should refuse to direct a soul who has, as long as the director is at least a man of learning. But he should limit himself to making sure that when he is dealing with both interior and exterior matters, he is following the natural path of reason. When it comes to supernatural experiences, all he needs to do is check to see if they are congruent with sacred scripture. As for the rest, he shouldn't kill himself trying to figure it all out. He should never presume that he understands it either. Above all, he must not repress the spirit. The soul is being guided by another greater master, and he has no authority in that case. Oh, you spiritual directors, do not be surprised by this. Don't think that such things are impossible. All things are possible for the Lord. Your only task is to humble yourselves and bolster your faith. So what if the Lord gives some little old woman deeper knowledge of this sacred science than He gives to a very learned man? Continuously cultivating humility will make that man much more useful, both to other souls and to himself, than trying to be a contemplative if he is not one. I'll say it again. If he has neither direct spiritual experience nor the humility to admit that he does not understand the experience of the soul he is guiding, he will be of little benefit to himself and even less to the people he's dealing with. Just because he doesn't understand something doesn't mean that the thing is impossible. If the guide is humble, he should not fear that the Lord would allow either of them to be deceived. The Lord made this Dominican friar very humble in a number of different areas. He has dedicated himself to finding out everything he can about the things he has not experienced. He is a great scholar, so if he doesn't know something, he investigates and finds someone who does. The Lord supports him by giving him a deep faith. He has grown immensely in this way and has been a big help to other souls, including mine. As it was, His Majesty was about to call home to himself a couple of great men who had been guiding my soul, Pedro of Alcantara and Pedro Ibáñez. But he replaced them with other guides to help me through some very difficult times, and they did me a great deal of good, like the priest I am telling you about. God has transformed this man almost completely. He hardly recognizes himself. Where he used to be weak and sickly, the Lord has given him the strength to undergo rigorous penances. He has the courage to do things he never dared try before. He seems to have received a very special calling from God. May he be forever blessed. I believe all these benefits have come to him through the blessings he has been receiving in prayer. Such goodness cannot be counterfeited. The Lord has already challenged him in certain areas, and he has emerged from these trials like an adept who knows the blessings that come through persecution. I hope that great good will come through him to members of his order and to the whole of the order itself. Actually, people are already beginning to realize who this priest is. I have seen great visions, and the Lord has told me some very important things about this man, as well as about the Jesuit director of whom I have spoken and 2 Dominicans. God has already revealed some great things about one of these Dominicans in particular. Before that, I was the only one who knew about the dramatic spiritual progress he had been making. But the one God has told me most about is this priest of whom I've been speaking. Now, I want to tell you about something. One day, I was sitting with this man in the parlor. My soul became aware of such a powerful love of God burning inside his spirit that it almost transported me beyond myself. Simply reflecting on the glory of God, who had elevated that soul to such a high state in such a short time, was enough to send me into rapture. But it also embarrassed me. There he was, listening with such humility to the things I had to say about prayer. Who was I to be speaking of such things to a person like this? I guess the Lord put up with it because of the passion I had to see this soul make ultimate spiritual progress. Being with him did my soul so much good that it seemed to revive the flames of my own longing to serve the Lord. Oh, my Jesus, how much a soul can accomplish when she is on fire with your love. How highly we should value such a soul, and how fervently we should pray to God to let this soul remain with us here on earth. Anyone who shares this love longing should follow such souls wherever they go. Isn't it a wonderful thing when a sick person encounters someone afflicted with the same malady? How comforting it is to know that you are not alone. The 2 wounded souls become a powerful help to one another. They inspire each other to risk 1,000 lifetimes for God. In fact, they welcome the opportunity to die and die again for Him. They are like warriors willing to go into battle because they know they will come away with great treasure. They cannot become rich unless they fight. It is their supreme duty to labor and suffer and triumph. Oh, what a marvelous thing it is when the Lord sheds His light on the mind so that we realize how much we gain when we suffer for Him. Until we abandon everything for Him, we will not understand this. Clinging to something is a sign that we are attached to it. If we are attached, it causes us grief to give it up. This clinging only leads us astray. Remember the saying, "He who goes after what is lost gets lost himself"? That fits perfectly here. What greater spiritual ruin is there? What greater blindness? What greater misfortune can there be than to cherish something that is nothing? Well, to get back to what I was saying, as I sat contemplating that soul, I was filled with deep joy. It seems that the Lord wanted me to see clearly the treasures He had placed there. When I realized the favor He had granted me by making me the instrument of this spiritual blossoming, I knew I didn't deserve it. But I valued the blessings the Lord had given to this soul more than if He had given them to me. In fact, I considered them to be more my own than those that were actually mine. I praised His Majesty for hearing my prayer and fulfilling my great desire that He awakened souls like this. And then my soul reached its full capacity for joy and went out of itself. Lost in this way, I had all the more to gain. All reflections evaporated, and I forgot them. Now, the Holy Spirit was doing the talking. Hearing that divine language, my rapture deepened. It only lasted a short time, but it almost made me lose my senses. Then, I saw Christ. Radiating awesome power and glory, he expressed his pleasure over what was happening. "You see," he said, "I am always present in conversations like these." He wanted me to understand the great delight it gives him when people find their great delight in speaking of him. Another time, when this priest was far away, I saw him, lifted up by the angels in great glory. This vision taught me that his soul was making excellent progress. Soon after this, someone spread cruel slander against the priest's honor. He had provided a remedy for his accuser's soul at a time when the man's own reputation was at stake. The priest cheerfully endured this betrayal. He performed other acts and suffered other persecutions that were of great service to God. I don't think it makes sense for me to say anything more about this now. You know all the details yourself. If you think it is appropriate, you can write them down later for the glory of God. By the way, everything I said about the prophecies concerning this monastery, as well as other prophetic visions I'll tell you about later, were fulfilled. Some of them came to pass 3 years after they were revealed. Others took more time, still others, less. I always shared these prophecies with my confessor and with Doña Guiomar, in whom I had permission to confide. I know that she told them to other people, so I have proof that I am not lying. May God never permit me to speak anything but the whole truth on any subject, especially in such a serious matter as this. Around this time, a brother-in-law of mine died suddenly. I was deeply grieved because he hadn't gotten a chance to go to confession before he died. Then I was told in prayer that my sister, too, would die this way, and I should go to her immediately so that she could prepare herself. When I told my confessor about it, he didn't let me go. So the message kept coming to me from God. When my confessor heard about this, he told me to go there, since he couldn't see that any harm would come of it. Maria lived in that little village where I had stayed during my illness so many years ago. Without mentioning the spiritual voices, I enlightened her as much as I could on every relevant subject. I got her to tend her soul with the greatest care and to confess frequently. Maria was a good person, and she did all this willingly. She was conscientious, and these customs soon became ingrained in her. 4 or 5 years later, my sister also died alone without the opportunity to cleanse her soul formally. Fortunately, since she had developed the habit of confessing her transgressions, she had taken care of her soul in this way only a week before she died. It brought me great joy to hear news of her death. She did not linger in purgatory. Within a week, the Lord appeared to me after I had received communion. He wanted to show me how he had brought Maria to glory. In all those years, from the time the Lord predicted my sister's death until the day she died, I never forgot what he had revealed to me. Neither did my companion. When Maria died, Doña Guiomar came to me amazed about how the revelation had been fulfilled. May God be praised forever. He takes such good care of souls so that they won't get lost.